Hello again, and welcome to this episode of GCSE Litcast, the revision podcast for WJEC GCSE. Today we're going to have a look at the essay question for Unit 1, just a very quick talk through and some top tips to help you get the most out of those 20 marks in your exam. Alright, so you've opened the exam to the right page, you've got yourself through the extract question and you're feeling pretty good. Let's talk about the essay question. The essay question is 20 marks and we expect you to spend around 40 minutes on it. And this one assesses AO1 and AO4. So this is our knowledge of our characters, themes, the kind of writer's choices, and then context. And actually context is weighted as around 2/3 in this essay. So context is hugely important. So whereas in the last episode where I talked about extracts, I told you don't put context in, not unless it's going to be really useful and really valuable. You do not need context. Here, I'm saying do put context in. Put it in everywhere you can. But crucially, keep it relevant. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. So you will get a choice of question. Often one of them is character based and one is thematic or based on a theme. Sometimes they can be a little bit crafty, a little bit more abstract. Sometimes they can focus on a relationship. Sometimes they can both kind of feel a bit thematic. Sometimes they might ask you to select almost what character you want to talk about. They might ask you to write about the character you have most sympathy for. There's a really wide range of ways they can phrase the questions, but by and large, you will be asked to write about a character or a theme, and you will have a choice. So an example could be writing about Candy or writing about Slim. It could be writing about George. And they ask you to think about how they represent kind of life at that time. So how they represent the context that they came from. And I'm sure that as you've studied the story, you've come to see that each of these characters almost represents an archetype of that particular group of people at that time in America. So what this does is it gives you an opportunity to use that character as a springboard to talk about context. And I would say that the character one, if it's a sort of straight character question, is often a little bit more straightforward to kind of do that. Slim might be the exception, but even he, because he is the exception, can again show lots of context in quite a straightforward way. So if you're not so confident with this and a character comes up, then as long as you kind of know that character, it's a good one to go for. With the theme, you do have the option to talk about lots of characters there and how they link to the theme. So you might get a question like something about Of Mice and Men shows how trapped and powerless people were in America. Well, that can link to power and the power hierarchy on the ranch, but that could also link to dreams and then all the different characters that kind of link to those. So there's options within that one. There's a bit more flexibility perhaps in the thematic question, but that can also bring with it a level of complexity. So it's very much a personal preference and how confident you are with what comes up. So you really want to make sure that you don't just focus on characters or just themes. You want to have a good spread of both and also think about how the two connect. So how the characters embody themes and how the themes are exemplified through the characters and relationships. You might be asked as part of the question, it might be phrased in some way around to what extent do you agree with a statement. They do quite like those questions as well. So if that's the case, then you need to think about to what extent do you agree? You know, how trapped and powerless are people in America? And think about whether you think it's partly, fully, not at all, and kind of take it from there. Now, when you think about that, you don't get better marks if you fully agree or fully disagree, or, again, it's about how well you construct your argument. It doesn't really matter. And actually, I would say it's probably easier to make a better argument if you kind of sit in the middle and sit on the fence. Or at least if you acknowledge the other side of the argument to the one that you're kind of arguing. I think that's kind of the key thing there. So we've got our choice. You need to read both of the essay questions carefully, maybe read them twice, and then highlight the keywords in the question again. Okay. It may feel like you don't need to do that. It may feel like that's not a good use of your time, but I promise you it is. Just spending a little bit of time really reading the question carefully and planning can make such a difference to the quality of your response. And it stops things like mixing up, when you're reading at pace in an exam, mixing up characters like Candy and Curly, where you see the capital C and then you just assume that it's a particular character, or reading it as Curly and it turns out it's Curly's wife, but your brain sort of skipped the wife as you read super fast. So just make sure that you're reading it, because again, every year people will misread the question because they're reading fast and not kind of double checking. So really check that. Then you want to plan your response. So we would suggest that you write an introduction, and I'm sure that you're quite familiar now with the introduction triangle approach. But we'd recommend that you try and do that in the exam. There's a couple of reasons for that. It really helps set out your argument. It makes your answer feel a bit more well structured, measured, sophisticated. It's not just kind of this ramble where you're sort of saying the first thing that comes into your head and there's no sort of structure to your thoughts. It adds that structure. It's really useful to refer back to, because 40 minutes can, in the context of an exam, can feel like quite a long time. So you might end up deviating from your original argument. You might end up sort of losing your way. You might end up, as is really common, talking a lot about context and sort of forgetting to bring it back to your original argument and your character or your theme. So the introduction allows you to check that and kind of ground yourself back in that argument. And it's also a really nice, easy structure to remember that doesn't take too much brain power. So it allows you to warm your brain up for this question. So our introduction triangle starts with a broad link to the question, then mentioning a couple of examples of maybe what we'll discuss in the essay. Don't go into loads of detail there. We're kind of giving people a little bit of a sneak peek as to what's kind of coming. And then we want a thesis statement. In other words, the argument that you're going to make. So especially if you've got a question that says, to what extent do you agree? That's the sentence where you can say whether you agree or not and why. And then that gives you, again, grounding to kind of return back to it. So that introduction triangle can be really valuable in setting yourself up. If for whatever reason that doesn't work for you, that's fine. Just write yourself some sort of introduction where you're laying out your aims, your arguments. Don't spend ages writing, I will first talk about this, then I will do this, then I will do this. Because for this essay with this timing, that's not a useful use of your time or your energy. What you want to do is ultimately give us a sneak peek of your argument and set yourself up in terms of your plan and things you want to talk about, without just giving me a sort of list of I wills, because you will spend all your time writing I will and you won't actually get round to doing any of it. So an introduction is really important, and the way to get a good introduction is to make sure that you've got a clear plan. So we want to make sure that we plan. We want to have a few points. We're looking for maybe 3 to 4 big points here. Realistically, in 40 minutes, 3 strong points is going to be a good thing to aim for. But again, this is not a hard and fast rule. You can write as many points as you like. Just make sure that they're detailed, make sure they're serving the purpose of answering the question, and make sure that they are focused on the AOs, AO1 and AO4. So we want to make sure we are referring to relevant social, historical and cultural details throughout the essay. The key thing there is relevant. We do not want this to be a history essay. This is why that balancing act is really important here. We want to make sure that we're demonstrating our knowledge of context, but we're keeping it in the world of Mice and Men and the Ranch. And we want to also be selecting key details from the text to answer the question as well. So when we're thinking about trying to remember quotes, we want to be thinking about quotes that are going to be really versatile, that can work in a number of different essays. There's no shortcut to learning quotes. You just have to learn them. I recommend post-it notes stuck around your house. I also recommend using quizzes. That's way more efficient than just writing them out and highlighting them or putting them in a mind map. If you enjoy doing that, then great. But if you want it to be a bit more efficient, then do quizzing. Use flashcards and test yourself for 3 to 5 minutes every day. You will find that you will learn them a lot quicker that way. There's something called the Leitner method, where you test yourself, and the ones that you get right, you put in one box. The ones that you get wrong, you put in a different box, and then you use kind of a routine of spaced retrieval to be able to learn them. That is, again, really effective, and there's lots of information about that online. But ultimately, you need to find something that works for you, that isn't going to stress you out, and that you feel is helping you make progress. And you need to really be starting, if you haven't already started doing that, then you need to be doing that ASAP, because this exam creeps up on you. It feels like ages away before Christmas Day, and then after Christmas Day, it feels like it's going to happen tomorrow, and you start panicking. So just give yourself a little bit of grace there. Give yourself a bit of time to really get used to those quotes, and just do a little bit every day rather than having to cram for the exam, because cramming is never fun and it's never effective. All right. So we know that it's closed book. We have to remember some quotes. It is really useful to have a range of quotes. Remember that the context is hugely important here. If you can't remember a quote word for word, maybe, can you remember a word from it? Can you get that down? Can you, give your very best guess? You're not going to get as good marks as if you obviously quote correctly, because you're not quoting accurately. But still, if there's something that you think that's really powerful that you want to say, and that's the only thing holding you back, then definitely, try and paraphrase or try and get something written down, because that's better than nothing at all. So when we're thinking about writing our main paragraphs, we talked about an introduction there. When we're thinking about writing our main paragraphs, we want to try and have a topic sentence that sets up our paragraph. That's like we're setting out our stall, we're setting out our argument. And what you want for your topic sentence is a sentence that makes someone say, prove it. So a bold statement about a character, a bold statement about a theme, etc. Then we want to try and include some embedded quotations. We don't want to spend ages sort of writing a build up to a quotation. We don't need to do that. Just include it in your sentencing as you go. And again, you'll have done lots of practice of that in class. So, use your skills from class. And you don't necessarily have to practice loads and loads and loads of essays and extracts, although that can be really helpful and really useful. But practicing your plan and then practicing these skills in isolations can be useful as well. So just practice embedding those quotations. Practice writing a couple of sentences and embedding a quote in them. Get yourself used to that, because if you find that difficult, that's going to slow you down in the exam. So just try and practice that. Relevant context as well. If you're talking about Curly's wife, and then start giving me loads of context about migrant workers, I need to know why there's a connection there. Whereas if you were talking about the misogyny, then I would make that connection more easily. So just make sure that your context is relevant. And you need to make frequent links back to the question. So try and conclude each of your each of your main paragraphs at the very least, and link them back to the question. If you can link back to the question throughout the paragraph, even better. And you do want to make sure that you're using key terms, so key linguistic terms, any sophisticated vocabulary. You want to be communicating clearly. Even though you're not explicitly marked on that, it does make a difference to the overall quality of your essay, and it sort of lends itself to the higher points on the mark scheme, where they'll talk about being astute, there'll be confident exploration. That is in part how you write, and that might not feel fair because this is a literature exam rather than an exam that is examining your writing, but that's how it is. And ultimately the knowledge, the skills, the understandings are all linked together, and you demonstrating that confidence through the ability to construct a really persuasive argument is part and parcel of creating that essay. And that's why you'll have practiced those bits in class as well. So for those kind of 15 to 20 marks, which is our sort of B-ish grade or above, we're looking at relevant detail, confident exploration. We need to think about the connection between the characters, the themes, and the context of the novella. And we also need to think about the writer here. So we need to make sure that we're bringing in Steinbeck and make sure that we're mentioning that it's Steinbeck's characters as constructs. And Steinbeck is writing... Steinbeck uses this word. Steinbeck is writing about this to illustrate this about life in 1930s. For 18 to 20 marks, there may be some originality. I would hazard a guess that considering how long Of Mice and Men has been on the spec and how popular it is, there's not much that has never been said about Of Mice and Men. But when they say originality, they're saying that just the way that you write, the way that you construct your argument might be a little bit less formulaic than perhaps what they see normally. Remember that Of Mice and Men is an incredibly popular text on this exam. So they see so many essays about these characters and these themes. So just, if they see something a bit different, they're obviously going to notice that and comment on it. I wouldn't worry about that, to be honest. Just focus on getting a really good essay. If it so happens to be written in an original way, then that's a bonus. So we're looking for analysis of the writer's techniques and language. References are wide-ranging and detailed. So it is still important to get those quotes in there, to get that reference, to get that knowledge of the text in there. Yes, a lot of the marks are linked to context. You need to make sure that you're including that context. But it is still an English literature essay. It is still about this novella. So make sure that is kind of the focus of your essay and of your argument. So if you're thinking about 10 to 14 marks, so roughly 12 out of 20 might get you a C grade. But again, it's really difficult to say because the grade boundaries change every year. But these are our kind of top two bands. So we still want to kind of make sure that we've got our quotes in there. So if we're thinking about writing for the 10 to 14 marks, there may be a little bit of narrative drive in there. So we might have a little bit of description in there. But by and large, we are still analysing. For 13 to 14 marks, which we would say normally is, that kind of C or above, that comfortable C or above. But again, grade boundaries change. We need thorough answers, a clear focus on the question and the character. In this case, it's a character question, or the theme's importance. There are suggestions of particular scenes in the mark scheme. It doesn't matter if you have something different, as long as your argument is sound, then you're good, you're safe. So when we're thinking about our essay question, there's quite a lot of things to balance. But ultimately, if we strip it back, our kind of top tips are that we need to make sure that we're reading the question carefully, that we highlight those key points or underline those keywords in the question. We make sure that we take the time to plan. It can be 1 minute, it can be 2 minutes that you plan. But every single person should have a plan. And remember, you can write that in your exam book and then put a cross through it at the end. When the exam papers are scanned in or when they're kind of posted to examiners, most examiners are teachers or ex-teachers, so they know what a plan looks like. You're not going to lose marks for having a plan on your exam book. So if you want to use the paper there, then you just do that and then draw a line, or just make sure there's a clear gap between the plan and the essay. We're looking for around 2 to 3 sides of your exam booklet. You might write a little bit more. But yeah, around 2 to 3 sides kind of gives just enough depth and detail for you to have a chance at some of those higher marks. And we want to make sure that we are thinking about our relevant context. That's where the plan can be really useful. Because say, for example, you're doing an essay about a character, you can write down 3 or 4 things that you want to say about that character, and then in your plan you can make a note of what contextual links you can make at that point. And it means that when you're writing, you're focused just on writing the essay because you've got the content plan there. You're not having to think about what's coming next while you're writing because you've already planned it. And what that means is, again, when we talked about stamina in the extract and writing up the extract, it's exactly the same thing. It means you won't run out of steam partway through. You won't be clutching at straws 25 minutes into answering this question because you've got your plan there and there's those key points that you want to make. And you might not cover everything in your plan. Again, that's fine. Because what that does is it gives you just that material to work with, and then you're refining it as you go. And again, answering the question is the most important thing. So we want to make sure we're making links back to the question, and we're trying to include our quotes as best as we can, because this is closed book. So we want to demonstrate our knowledge through those quotes, but again, relevant quotes. Think of it as the kind of the MasterChef approach, right? So, or the Bake Off approach, or whatever. There's all the ingredients in the cupboard. You wouldn't put all of them into every single recipe because it would be a rubbish recipe, right? What you want is the very best ingredients for the recipe in front of you. And if the recipe is a Curly's Wife essay, or if the recipe is Power in the 1930s essay, those ingredients are going to look slightly different. And when we get up to those top bands, it's about selecting the ingredients that are best for the job. And sometimes being discerning and deciding that you're going to leave certain things out because they're just not relevant at this point. And that is showing an almost higher level of knowledge than just trying to shove everything in and show how much you know about everything, because that's not kind of focusing on the question. So just make sure that you're thinking about the ingredients that are best for the job. And you try and get that terminology in there if you can. If nothing else, it's great practice for English language, but it's also a really nice way to level up your writing and to level up the sophistication of your response. Okay, that's a quick overview of essays, just talking you through some top tips there as to how to answer the essay question. In our next episode of this kind of little mini exam series, we will tackle the elephant in the room, the unseen poetry, and all the joy that it brings. So we'll have a chat about that, and hopefully give you a few tips that you can use no matter what poem pops up on the back of your exam paper in January. Thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next one. you for listening to Litcast, the podcast for GCSE and A-level revision. The music that you hear in this episode is called Galaxy and was written by Ixon, and you can find the rest of his music on SoundCloud. You can also find us on other social media channels, including YouTube, where you'll also find our Litcast live episodes. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you again.